We are at Oxford University for a special program on education and research. Oxford is the oldest university in the English-speaking world and is the celebrated leader in learning and teaching, and is eminently at the forefront of research in every imaginable field. We'll have the privilege of meeting with Baroness Susan Greenfield, a professor of pharmacology at Oxford University and a neuroscientist, writer and broadcaster. She's been awarded 30 honorary degrees from British and foreign universities, and her research group is exploring brain mechanisms that are linked to neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. We'll learn more about this essential research following these messages. With us now is Baroness Susan Greenfield. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you here today.
Nice to meet you.
Oxford is so beautiful and the research you're doing is so very important. Please tell our audience a little about the research you're doing.
Well, basically I'm very interested in the brain and the things that we don't know about it. That's to say, the novel mechanisms which might help us have greater insight into all aspects of our lives. But in particular, the actual work I do is on Alzheimer's disease and related so-called neurodegenerative diseases. But also this extends this interest in novel mechanisms to deeper questions still about how the brain generates consciousness and how, for younger people, technology might be changing the way they think and feel. But our actual bench work, the experiments we do, actually is centered on devising a better treatment, a better approach for the so-called neurodegenerative disorders.
It is said that people's lifestyles have an influence on one's degeneration in age. Is this true?
Well, it's certainly the case that we're living longer in our privileged Western world, and as the spectres of TB and cancer, although they're still serious diseases, are becoming more treatable, then so diseases of the older people become more to the fore. And we know that Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease are diseases, they're not natural consequences of aging, which means if there are diseases, there must be a reason for them, and if there's a reason for them, we could eventually intercept it if only we could identify those mechanisms. So yes, we're living longer lives, which means that we will witness greater incidences of neurodegeneration, but it's not the lifestyle as such, it's the fact that biomedical advances have made such progress that really we can now look forward to a longer and healthier old age than our predecessors.
A question most people would like me to ask you is, what makes a person a person?
That's a really interesting question because without being offensive to goldfish, you couldn't ask the same question, say, of a goldfish because they don't have great personalities. And if your kid had a goldfish and it died, you could go and get another goldfish. Child would come home from school and wouldn't be able to tell any difference. And you couldn't do that with cats or dogs, and you certainly couldn't do it with their brothers or sisters, because as we become more sophisticated in the evolutionary sweep of things, so we become more and more individual. And it's quite a scary but quite gratifying thought at the same time that for the 100,000 years we've stalked this planet, no one has a brain like yours, or more particularly a mind like yours. They'll have hearts, lungs and livers like yours, but no one sees the world as you do, even if you are a clone, that's to say, an identical twin. And the secret of that, we're now discovering in neuroscience over the last few decades, is due to the so-called plasticity of the human brain. And plasticity doesn't mean, of course, the brain is plastic. It comes from the Greek plastikos, to be moulded, which suggests that every experience you have is leaving its mark on your brain. And there's lots of studies now on that, and it's astonishing how the brain is changing every moment you're alive in accordance with the experiences you're having. So the connections between the brain cells are very sensitive to reflecting how much they're used. So when you're born as a human, the wonderful thing about being born a human is not that we run fast or see well and we're not strong compared to other animals. What we do fantastically is we adapt by virtue of the fact that our brains are able to change according to our experiences. And there's one very nice example of that. Certainly in London it was a nice example of black cab drivers. And the London black cab, as I'm sure many of your viewers know, is special because the drivers, unlike other parts of the world, have had to pass a very serious exam called the Knowledge, where for 2 years they study all the one-way streets of London. They know all the regulations and the restrictions, so that you say to them, take me from A to B, and they're able to do that without recourse to a manual. So they have a huge burden on their working memory, so-called. And in an ingenious study that's now actually become a classic, they scanned the brains of London taxi drivers and found that an area of the brain relating to memory was bigger in London taxi drivers than other people. So we know that you use it or you lose it. The more you exercise certain bits of your brain or do certain activities, the more that will change. And what is amazing is the more you exercise different brain cells, they will grow branches, which enables them to have a greater surface area, which means they can make better contact with other brain cells. So the more you're interacting with the environment, the more you're able to make connections, to see one thing in terms of other things. And I think this is something that we do superlatively compared to other species. Although others do it, we do it better than any other. And because we can therefore personalize our brains, guess what? We become individual people. And that is something that evolves throughout your life. And it's, of course, that process, those connections, that are dismantled in Alzheimer's disease, which is why one sees the disintegration one does of someone you love, someone that had lots of memories, sadly leaving that behind, and sadly retracing the steps of childhood and becoming almost infantile.
What you're saying brings to mind a book we read entitled The Talent Code on myelin, and how practice, as you say, makes perfect. Are there restrictions in your research? For example, in other parts of the world, the United States and so forth, there's a lot of controversy with regard to stem cell research. Are any such factors affecting what you do?
In the UK, we don't have the same situation, I think, as occurs in the States. That's not so much the problem. We do have problems with working with so-called whole animals. And there's been, over the last 10 or 20 years, and certainly since I've been doing research, there's been a great change in how people view animal experiments. And my view there is, what I would like to see is every prescription should be printed with the simple statement, the prescription you're about to take was developed on animals. And then if you truly are against animal testing, you shouldn't cash in that prescription. And I think that would be a very simple, cheap thing to do, and that would be a very straightforward way of reminding people that eventually drugs have to be tested on animals, sadly. But again, if it's a choice between my mother and a rabbit, then I don't have a problem with making that choice. And as long as it's done humanely and under legislation as it is, that is one of the issues we have. The other constraint is inevitably funding, of course, because money is very tight here in Europe. And when money is tight, people become very risk averse and adopt the mainstream approach, which may or may not be good, but on the other hand, it doesn't allow for expression of a wide range of different approaches. And certainly for Alzheimer's, we need that. There hasn't been a new drug for Alzheimer's for the last 15 years.
Speaking of constraints, in the United States, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, allegedly is giving some vitamin companies a hard time. And in fact, Bill Falloon, the founder of Life Extension Foundation, wrote this book he wants me to give you for you to peruse.
Okay. Well, it'd be interesting to compare the situation in the States with the UK.
I would suppose so, yes.
Okay.
I'd like to ask you about the effect of technology on children. Mm-hmm. How does it affect them, their development?
Well, I think this is one of the big issues of our time, and I've drawn analogies with climate change. And just as climate change is unprecedented and global and controversial and multifaceted, so I'd like to think of as mind change being similar. That is to say, the impact of technology nowadays on the very vulnerable brain, especially the young brain. If we say the brain adapts to the environment, if you now have an environment that's a cyber environment, it's inevitable the brain will adapt to that. And what we have to do is work out what's good, what's bad, what we want to harness, what we want to minimize in terms of issues. Because the human brain, as I say, is particularly vulnerable in early years, and there's already data accumulating that there are changes that are coming with excessive social networking sites, with compulsive video gaming, or the way people use search engines, and all these are separate questions that can be asked.
Well, if I may ask you to elaborate on that a little more, How damaging is it for the youth of today to be spending excessive time playing mindless video games?
I'm nervous to use words like damaging because that implies a value judgment. Because if some people think that the end result is a good thing, then clearly it's a good thing. But what is unquestionable is that every hour you spend in cyberspace in front of a screen is an hour not spent walking along a beach or giving someone a hug or looking someone in the eye. So however beneficial and wonderful screen activities may be, say they were unconditionally wonderful, even so there would be problems, because if you're doing it obsessively, it means you're not doing something else. You're not living in 3 dimensions. And whilst there is evidence, indeed, that certain things can be very good, especially for people with special needs, in terms of rehearsal and execution of what they do, both physically and mentally. As we know, whatever you rehearse, you become good at. Now, if you're rehearsing through social networking sites, say, all your forms of communication, and we know that's the case because now people are saying offices are more silent because people are texting or emailing each other, rather, or being posted on social networking, rather than talking to each other. If that's the case, it means you're not going to be very good at eye contact, at body language, at interpreting voice tone, and when and how and where to touch someone. All those things would lead to what we would call empathy. When you first meet someone, words have only about 10% of the impact. The rest are all these other interpersonal skills. And if you've never rehearsed them, you're not going to be good at them, which means it'll be even more aversive when you meet someone, which means that you will seek out the alternative of the more sanitized distancing that the screen can offer. So I do get concerned about notions of identity. For example, John Beddington, who's the science advisor to the British government, in January or February of this year, actually issued a report that anyone can download about the now volatile, he says, the volatile nature of identity due to the social networking sites and the problem that might cause. The World Economic Forum, which is a very prestigious organization, meeting in Switzerland in January every year, this year said that being what they called hyperconnected and causing a digital wildfire was one of the greatest risks to humanity. So I think we should take all these things rather seriously. We also know there's evidence for low self-esteem and narcissism among young people who, again, are obsessively social networking. One could go through a lot more data, but that just gives a sort of overview. And then you look at video gaming, and we know there is a strong connection, there's a bidirectionality between attention deficit problems, short attention spans, and video gaming. We know that violent video games will lead to a more aggressive mindset. We know that people can become addicted to video games. My other worry with video games is it's a very bad lesson to learn if you're a kid, that actions don't have consequences. You know, that if someone is shot, they can be undead the next time around. Now, that's not to say that video games don't have benefits, like enhancing your sensory motor skills, like if you want to be a drone bomber, for example, or if you want to be an endoscopic surgeon, they may be very good. They're also good, some might argue, for improving IQ, because the same mental agility that you're exercising is the same as required for IQ tests. But on the other hand, an increase in IQ, as is characterizing our society, is not also leading to a concomitant increase, let's say, in insights into the Middle East crisis or the world's economic woes. So on the one hand, just because you can promote mental agility does not mean to say that you are promoting wisdom. Information and information processing is not the same as knowledge, and I think that we have to be careful about that. And then we come to search engines and how people are, instead of thinking and using their memory and going to the effort of trying to remember things, will now just press a button on Google. And I think the way we are using information, the way we're processing it, might be changing, given that we lack the normal sort of framework, the conceptual framework that previously has characterized traditional education, where someone helps you join up the dots. If no one's helping you join up the dots and you are just meandering around surfing, if you can meander and surf at the same time, then I think it may be you have a rather piecemeal, fragmented database for your information rather than something that's cohesive. And I think that needs to be looked into as well. So there are lots of issues that can be unpacked. That's just really scratching the surface of it.
Absolutely fascinating. May I ask you, Baroness, what are your plans for the future and what are the challenges your department is facing?
Well, my primary task and goal, although I do different types of activities, my main goal is to develop a better treatment for Alzheimer's disease, because in the UK, I don't know about the US statistics, 2 million people by the middle of this century will be suffering from it. And if, say, 10 people love you in the world, that will be 20 million lives affected, which is a third of the country's population in our case. And I'm sure the numbers are even more eye-watering for the US. So that is something that I feel very passionate about, and I feel we're onto something, but most scientists would say that, of course, it's the thing we all say, but I really do think we are. We're adopting a novel approach, and that for me is the most exciting and meaningful thing I could be doing. But I am also interested in technology in the brain. I'm interested in the more philosophical issue of how the brain generates consciousness, and along the way, ways of expressing and exploring these different subjects is not just through scientific papers, but I also am in Parliament, as you know. I also write books to the general public and give more general talks. So what I feel very privileged about is that I have the opportunity to disseminate the kinds of interests I have in this way. And if people, as I hope they do, find this important for the 21st century, then I think overall I feel very satisfied with that.
How can, if I may say, a world-famous scientist such as yourself, you have 30 honorary degrees and you also are a member of the House of Lords, how do you do all of these things?
I think as one gets older in life, you start to value the things that you enjoy doing and not fret about the things you're not good at and that inevitably you don't enjoy doing. So in my case, cooking and gardening are completely out because I'm terrible at them, I have no interest in them, and if I had to do that over a weekend, I would regard that as work. Whereas reading, thinking, writing about the brain, I find fascinating. Whilst others might think I was working, for me it doesn't really feel like work as such. So I think as you get older, you start to realise what you enjoy doing and focus on that, and not worry about being different or other people being recruited to do the same thing. So yes, I have time because I don't do a lot of conventional things that other people do. I'll quite happily, in my own case, eat baked beans out of a can. I'd rather not, but I'll happily do that because I have a very low threshold of food tolerance. I don't mind what I eat, whereas other people are very fussy about cooking proper food and so on. So not junk food, but I just can't be bothered really to prepare it or to do gardening and so on. So I do enjoy writing very much, and I'm particularly excited because my first novel is coming out, and I've always wanted to write a novel. Like I'm sure most of us have ambitions, and I always wanted to write a novel. Now I have. And for me that is very satisfying, and whether or not people like it, whether the reviews are good, obviously it would be nice if they were. But in a sense I don't care because it's something I want to do and I've done it. And it's not something that is my mainstream activity, but it's something that I always fancied doing, and now I have. And it's a very nice thing in life to actually set yourself a goal and achieve it.
So what is the title of the book?
The title is 2121, that's a date, subtitle, A Tale from the Next Century. And what it is an extension of the kinds of issues that we've been discussing on mind change, that is to say, projecting forward over 100 years, and rather than looking now over the next 5 years, to think, well, if everything goes as it seems to be going, if these trends start to unfold, what will happen in 2121? What kind of people will be? What kind of society will we have? And I have to say it is a dystopia, unfortunately. But there was a splinter group that left 2 generations earlier. And the hero of this splinter group is a brain scientist with very similar views on the brain to myself. And he's dispatched to go back to this larger community and try and find out how their brains are working and how they can be taken over. So it's not really science fiction. I'd like the biggest compliment I could be paid if someone said this is like 1984 or Brave New World, the great dystopias of the 20th century. If someone had said that, I would be very, very happy. So that's what it's an attempt at. Yes.
Baroness, earlier you mentioned the Middle East. I'd like to ask you what your thoughts are on the ongoing conflict there and your thoughts on Israel.
Well, someone once said, for every complex situation, there's always a simple answer, and it's always wrong. For something this complex, one can't really give a soundbite. I can give my own personal impressions of the Middle East, because I've been there many times. I'm of Jewish extraction. My dad's Jewish. And between school and university, the way it works in England, if you, in those days, went to Oxford or Cambridge, you had a 9-month gap, having done special exams and so on. And I used that time, that gap year, to work in a kibbutz in the north of Israel, in a place called Gisha Haziv, where I felt I saw a little of Israeli life. I worked in the baby house. I learned enough Hebrew to freak out Israelis that think I speak Hebrew. They soon see through me after a few iterations. But nonetheless, I worked there for 6 months, well, 4 months on the kibbutz and 2 months in an old age home in Haifa. We traveled extensively, hitchhiking everywhere. So I feel, to see you know a country is very hard, but I feel a great affection and affinity, obviously, having been there that amount of time. And as it turned out, when I subsequently took the scientific path that I did, it turned out that the chemical I was working on is very well researched in Israel. So even if I hadn't had the ethnicity and the background to be interested in Israel, nonetheless, I would have been working with and interacting with Israeli scientists on this particular chemical. Those 2 things led to me being governor of the Weizmann Institute for a while, to being on the advisory board of something called Britec, which was a system in those days for the British and Israeli governments to help technologies develop that neither could develop unilaterally. And then there was a terrible time, when was it? It was about 2005 or 4, when a group of British academics decided to boycott Israeli scientists, not to publish their papers, not to invite them to meetings, because they disapproved of Sharon, who was Prime Minister, his policy on the West Bank. And I thought this was terrible, because boycotts of that type never win anything. No one ever wins with that. So the Palestinians weren't benefiting. Certainly the people that proposed the boycott were looking small-minded and petty. The scientists themselves, I thought this was grotesquely unfair, and it was like boycotting we British scientists because we invaded Iraq. I mean, that didn't have a decision to be made. It's just something our Prime Minister did. So no one won and everyone lost, and I thought it was a very silly thing. So I wrote a rather robust piece in the national paper, and as a result of that, was very honoured with 2 honorary degrees, one from Haifa, one from, edit that out.
Okay.
One from the Hebrew University and the other from Haifa, which was enormously gratifying, and I was delighted to do that. Then at one stage I tried to lead a delegation of British scientists, not just to Israel but across to Jordan, and that would have happened. The Foreign Office were going to sponsor it, and I had some willing Gentile scientists from the UK, but sadly the Iraq invasion obviously paid to that, and by the time everything was resolved, the budgets inevitably had dissolved, so that didn't work. So I go back to Israel quite a lot, say once a year or something like that. Not a lot, but sufficient to keep up with my old friends, and there's always something to do there. So I have a great affection for Israel. I'm not going to pretend that I've got some political solution or insight that people who've been there much more than me have. But it does seem to me to be the most vibrant. The Middle East generally is the most vibrant and exciting place. I've also visited Saudi and Jordan. I'm a trustee of the Alexandrian Library in Egypt. So I have some experience of the Arab states as well. And it does strike me we have, perhaps on a human level, a lot more in common than we have apart. And it's a great shame that we can't promote science and education and women's issues working together and using Israeli know-how to help promote peace, because, as the great Michael Faraday said, men of science are not men of war. And I think if you can make people's lives better, then they're not going to feel so tempted to take extreme measures. And I say I'm not even beginning to think of political solutions, how can I? But what I can as a scientist do is say the more you can promote science and education and interaction with that, then that has to be a good thing.
It would be so much more beneficial if they resolved issues with peaceful solutions.
Well, as Clinton once said, once you're dead, you can't be undead. It's not a video game. Once someone's undead, once someone's dead, that's it. You can't reverse that situation. So you might as well try and find a solution before they become dead, because life's not a video game.
Baroness, this has been most interesting and a real privilege to be with you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I'll be right back. Oxford University will certainly continue to be in the forefront of education and prestige. This is Richard Peritz. Thank you for being with us.